My name is Katherine Watson, and I'm 34 years old. Working as a pediatric surgeon in Boston has been my dream come true, even if my traditional status-obsessed parents never understood my choices. For 2 years, I avoided going home for the holidays, but this Christmas, I finally decided to return. Little did I know that dinner would turn into a battleground where I'd have to defend my entire life. The words they said cut deep, but what happened next changed everything forever. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my parents after 34 years, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a pristine colonial home with perfectly manicured lawns and an equally perfect-appearing family. My father, James Watson, built his reputation as one of the most formidable corporate lawyers in the state. Mother Diana maintained her position in high society through charity galas and social events that were more about being seen than making change. From my earliest memories, I understood that in the Watson family appearance was everything. Father would straighten his tie before entering our home, as if his own family required the same polished facade he presented to clients. Mother would pinch my cheeks before church, whispering, "Stand up straight," through her perfect smile. The Watson name came with expectations. A predetermined path had been laid before me since birth: prestigious private schools, Yale University, their alma mater marriage to someone from our social circle by 25, and a respectable career that wouldn't demand too much once I started producing the requisite grandchildren. "Katherine," my mother would say while brushing my hair before school, "a Watson woman is refined, respected, and always conscious of how her actions reflect on the family name." I became a master at meeting their expectations. Perfect grades, student council president, tennis team captain. I gave valedictorian speeches and won debate competitions. I did everything right, on the surface, but secretly, I was drawn to medicine. While my parents hosted dinner parties downstairs, I would hide in my room reading medical journals and biographies of pioneering female doctors. The summer I turned 16, I volunteered at Greenwich Hospital, not telling my parents I was working in the pediatric ward, rather than the administrative office as they assumed. The first time I helped calm a frightened child before a procedure, something clicked inside me. This was purpose. This was what I wanted to do with my life. But I kept this revelation buried, knowing it didn't fit the Watson blueprint. My brother Thomas understood. 2 years older than me, he had already begun his own rebellion, choosing to study environmental science instead of business or law. "Katie," he would tell me during late-night talks in our backyard, "someday you'll have to decide whose life you're living." When Thomas moved to Seattle after college, putting an entire continent between himself and our parents' expectations, I felt both abandoned and inspired. We stayed close through long phone calls, but I missed having my ally physically present. I followed the plan through high school and into Yale, where at least I could choose pre-med without open rebellion. My parents beamed at parent weekends, introducing me to the children of their colleagues and clients, particularly the male ones with promising futures in acceptable fields. "That's Jonathan Whitaker," Mother would whisper. "His father is a federal judge. He's heading to Harvard Law next year." Or, "Michael Preston's family owns half of downtown Hartford. He's interested in finance." During my junior year, when I had to formally declare my intentions for after graduation, the facade finally cracked. I sat my parents down during Thanksgiving break and told them I would be applying to medical school, not law school, as they had always assumed. "Medicine," Father's voice was quiet, which was always more dangerous than when he raised it. "Doctors work impossible hours, Katherine. How will you maintain a proper household, start a family? That's not the plan we discussed." "We didn't discuss any plan," I countered, feeling a courage I had rarely displayed. "You decided." Mother's face had that pinched look that signaled disapproval. "Think about what people will say. The Watsons have always been in law or finance." "Perhaps Katherine is going through a phase," Father suggested, as if I were 13 instead of 20. I held my ground that night, but it was only the beginning of a Cold War that would last years. The day my medical school acceptance letter arrived from Boston University, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. This was my dream finally within reach, but I knew sharing this news would ignite another battle at home. I called Thomas first. "I got in," I practically shouted into the phone. "I never doubted it for a second, Katie," he replied, genuine pride in his voice. "Are you ready for the fallout?" I waited until Sunday dinner when our family always maintained the pretense of perfect harmony. The roast was being carved when I placed my acceptance letter on the table. "I've been accepted to Boston University School of Medicine," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I start this fall." The silence that followed was deafening. Mother set down her fork with such deliberate precision it seemed she might shatter. Father didn't even look at the letter. "We've already discussed this, Catherine. Preston and Whitaker have connections at Yale Law. Your application is practically guaranteed." "I didn't apply to Yale Law," I said, "or any law school." Mother's face crumpled as if I'd announced a terminal diagnosis. "How could you make such a decision without consulting us? I tried consulting you last year. You didn't listen." Father pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood. "We're disappointed in you, Catherine. After everything we've provided, this is how you repay us, by throwing away your future." "I'm not throwing away anything," I insisted. "I'm building the future I want." "A future of exhaustion and wasted potential," Mother added. "No man of quality wants a wife who's never home." That night marked the first time they used the phrase that would become their weapon of choice: "We're disappointed in you." 4 words that cut deeper than any insult designed to make me question myself, to make me fall back in line. But something had shifted. For the first time, I realized I could survive their disappointment. It hurt. It hurt terribly, but it didn't destroy me. Moving to Boston that August felt like my first real breath of freedom. I found a small apartment in Back Bay that I shared with 2 other medical students. The space was cramped, nothing like my spacious bedroom at home, but it was mine. Medical school was everything I'd hoped for, and more challenging than I'd imagined. The hours were grueling, the material overwhelming, but I thrived on the sense of purpose. For the first time, I was completely immersed in a world that valued what I valued: knowledge, compassion, and the desire to help others. During my first year, I met Dr. Harriet Williams, a renowned pediatric surgeon, who would become my mentor and in many ways the mother figure I needed. In her 60s, with silver hair always pulled into a neat bun, Dr. Williams had navigated a medical career when female doctors were rarities. "Medicine isn't just a career, Catherine," she told me after watching me successfully place my first central line. "It's a calling. Never let anyone make you doubt your place here." With each passing semester, my confidence grew. I called home dutifully every Sunday, but the conversations remained superficial. My parents never asked about my studies or accomplishments. Instead, Mother filled the time with updates on family friends and not-so-subtle mentions of eligible bachelors. "Jennifer Lawrence's son David has just made partner at his father's firm," she would say. "Still single. Such a shame you're so far away." Father would get on the line briefly to ask about my finances, always offering money with strings attached. "If you're struggling up there, Catherine, you can always come home. Law school applications are accepted year-round." During my second year, they intensified their efforts to pull me back into their world. Mother organized a dinner party during my spring break, inviting every eligible bachelor in their social circle. I showed up with my medical textbooks and spent the evening discussing gastrointestinal emergencies over appetizers, watching potential suitors excuse themselves one by one. "Must you be so deliberately off-putting?" Mother hissed, as she refreshed drinks. "Daniel Hamilton's family has connections to every major hospital board in Connecticut." "Then he should understand my commitment to medicine," I replied, not looking up from my book. With each visit home, the distance between us grew. Not just physically, though I began limiting my trips to major holidays, but emotionally. I was becoming someone my parents didn't recognize and couldn't control, someone they claimed not to understand. Meanwhile, in Boston, I was building a life that felt authentic. Friends who shared my passion. Mentors who believed in my potential. a purpose that energized me even through 30-hour shifts and endless exams. For the first time, I wasn't living to please my parents. I was living for myself, and despite their disappointment, despite the growing rift, I had never felt more certain I was on the right path. My third year of medical school brought clinical rotations and the moment I'd been waiting for hands-on experience with patients. While many of my classmates dreaded the grueling schedule, I embraced it. Every exhausting shift confirmed that I had found my calling. During my pediatric rotation, I discovered my specialty. Working with children, their resilience, their honesty, their capacity for joy, even in the face of serious illness, resonated with something deep inside me. Dr. Williams noticed my aptitude and took me under her wing, allowing me to assist in increasingly complex surgeries. "You have a gift, Catherine," she told me after we successfully repaired a congenital heart defect in a 6-month-old baby. "Your hands are steady, but more importantly, you understand that we're treating not just the condition but the child and the family." By my 4th year, I had set my sights on a residency in pediatric surgery, one of the most competitive specialties. My parents' reaction was predictably negative. "More schooling, more training?" Father questioned during a tense phone call. "When exactly do you plan to start living your life?" "This is my life," I responded. "I'm already living it." Mother was more direct. "No one will want to marry a woman who's in her 30s before she even starts her career." I matched with my top choice, Boston Children's Hospital, one of the most prestigious pediatric surgical programs in the country. Thomas flew in from Seattle for my graduation, but my parents attended with tight smiles and minimal enthusiasm. At the reception, Dr. Williams approached them. "You should be incredibly proud of Catherine," she said warmly. "She's going to be an exceptional surgeon." "We're proud of all her accomplishments," Father responded diplomatically. "We simply worry about her balance in life." Residency was even more demanding than medical school. 80-hour work weeks, overnight calls, and the immense responsibility of caring for critically ill children. But with each successful procedure, with each child who left the hospital, healed, my confidence grew. During my 3rd year of residency, I made a decision that would widen the rift with my parents even further. I applied to Doctors Without Borders for a 6-month assignment in Sudan. When I told my parents over Thanksgiving dinner, their reaction was explosive. "Absolutely not," Father declared. "That's not just career suicide, it's potentially actual suicide. Those regions are dangerous, Catherine." "I'll be working in a secured compound with an international team," I explained. "The safety protocols are extensive." "What about your training here?" Mother demanded. "You'll be throwing away everything you've worked for." "Actually," I countered, "international experience is highly valued, and these children need surgical care they simply can't access otherwise." "This obsession with saving the world," Father said dismissively, "is going to cost you everything that matters: stability, family, connections." Despite their objections, I went to Sudan. Those 6 months changed me profoundly. I performed more surgeries than I would have in a year back home, often with limited resources that required improvisation and creativity. I treated children with conditions that had gone unaddressed for years, witnessing transformations that went beyond physical healing. It was in Sudan that I met Marcus, a photojournalist documenting humanitarian crises. He had a way of capturing human dignity in the most desperate circumstances. Unlike the men my parents had paraded before me, Marcus saw the world as I was beginning to see it, full of inequities that demanded action rather than indifference. We bonded over late-night conversations after grueling days. He showed me his photographs. I told him about my patients. We shared a perspective that went beyond our different professions, a belief that bearing witness to suffering created an obligation to address it. When my assignment ended, we promised to stay in touch. To my surprise, Marcus followed through, calling regularly as I returned to Boston to complete my residency, and he traveled to his next assignment. 6 months later, he took an assignment with National Geographic that brought him to Boston. Our friendship deepened into something more. Here was someone who understood my passion, who respected my career, who never once suggested I should be anything other than exactly who I was. When Thanksgiving approached, Marcus suggested coming with me to Connecticut to meet my family. I warned him about my parents, but he insisted. "I've faced warlords and corrupt officials," he joked. How bad can Connecticut socialites be? The disaster that followed surpassed even my worst expectations. From the moment we arrived, my parents treated Marcus with thinly veiled contempt. "Photography," Father repeated when Marcus described his work. "And that pays the bills, does it?" "I've been fortunate," Marcus replied graciously. "My work has been published in National Geographic Time and several international publications." Mother barely acknowledged him, directing most of her questions to me, particularly about when I planned to settle down into a more reasonable lifestyle. The breaking point came during dinner when Father asked Marcus about his family background. "My father was a high school teacher," Marcus explained. "My mother worked as a nurse. They raised me in rural Michigan." I watched my parents exchange a look that spoke volumes. In their world, this background was hopelessly inadequate. Later, as Marcus helped me clear the table, Father cornered me in the kitchen. "This is who you bring home, a glorified tourist with a camera. Catherine, you've had every advantage in life. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone, Father," I replied, feeling my temper rise. "I want someone who sees the world as it really is, not through the lens of privilege and status." Marcus overheard and stepped forward. "Mr. Watson, I respect that you want the best for your daughter. But Catherine is an extraordinary person who saves lives every day. Perhaps that's something worth recognizing." "Don't presume to tell me about my own daughter," Father snapped. That night, Marcus and I left early, driving back to Boston in tense silence. I felt both ashamed of my parents and grateful for Marcus's dignity in the face of their rudeness. "I'm sorry," I said finally as we crossed the state line. "Don't be," he replied, reaching for my hand. "This explains a lot about why you're so determined to forge your own path." That Christmas, for the first time, I didn't go home. I worked a shift at the hospital instead, performing emergency surgery on a 7-year-old with appendicitis. As I watched her parents' relief when I delivered the news that she would be fine, I felt certain I was exactly where I belonged. 2 years passed with minimal contact between my parents and me. I called on birthdays and major holidays, but our conversations remained superficial and brief. I sent cards at Christmas instead of visiting. Thomas occasionally acted as a reluctant intermediary, passing along family news without taking sides. During this time, my career flourished. I completed my residency and was offered a position as an attending surgeon at Boston Children's Hospital. My research on minimally invasive techniques for pediatric trauma cases was published in leading medical journals. I began mentoring younger residents, finding unexpected joy in passing along the knowledge Dr. Williams had shared with me. Marcus and I grew closer. His work continued to take him around the world for weeks at a time, but he always returned to Boston to me. We moved into an apartment together, a sun-filled space near the Charles River, where his photographs lined the walls alongside my medical textbooks. Unlike the relationships my parents had tried to orchestrate, ours was built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than social compatibility. We understood each other's commitment to our work. We supported each other's dreams without resentment. "You know," Marcus said one evening as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset, "most people would find your parents' version of success pretty appealing. Financial security, social status, a predictable life." "I know," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if something's wrong with me for wanting something different." "Nothing's wrong with you," he said firmly. "You just measure success differently, in lives changed rather than impressions managed." That conversation stayed with me. Was I wrong to reject my parents' vision of success? Was I being stubborn for the sake of rebellion? But every time I saved a child, every time I saw a family reunited after a successful surgery, I knew the answer. My 5th year as an attending surgeon brought a pivotal decision. I had been setting aside money for years initially, with the vague idea of eventually buying property. But as I worked in the hospital, I became increasingly aware of children who arrived with advanced conditions that could have been treated earlier with proper access to care. Many came from neighborhoods just miles from the hospital, but worlds away in terms of resources. Children whose treatable conditions had become life-threatening because their families couldn't navigate the healthcare system or lacked insurance. Rather than purchasing the upscale condo my parents had always envisioned for me, I decided to use my savings to open a free clinic in Dorchester, one of Boston's underserved neighborhoods. I would continue my hospital work but dedicate one day a week and some evenings to the clinic. The space I found was small, a former dental office with 3 exam rooms, but it was a start. I assembled a team of colleagues who shared my vision, a pediatrician nearing retirement who wanted to give back, a nurse practitioner with extensive community health experience, and 2 medical assistants from the neighborhood itself. We opened our doors with little fanfare, but word spread quickly. Soon we were seeing dozens of children each week, addressing everything from common illnesses to identifying serious conditions requiring referral to specialists or the hospital. News of my clinic reached my parents through mutual friends, specifically the Richardsons, whose daughter Stephanie had followed a more conventional path and occasionally updated her parents on my unusual choices. Mother called immediately. "A free clinic in Dorchester." Her voice carried the same tone she might use to describe opening a casino in a church. "Catherine, that neighborhood isn't safe. And working for free. What are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," I replied wearily. "I'm trying to help children who need it. There are established charities for that sort of thing," Father added, having picked up the extension. "Ones where you could serve on the board without putting yourself in danger. We know several." I didn't bother explaining that serving on a charity board wouldn't provide direct care to children who needed it now. We had reached the point where we simply couldn't understand each other's values. As Christmas approached, Thomas called with an unexpected request. "Katie, I think you should come home this year," he said. "After last time, no thanks." The memory of that disastrous Thanksgiving still stung. "It's been 2 years, he reasoned. "People change. And honestly, Mom's not getting any younger. She had that health scare last spring, remember?" I did remember. Mother had experienced chest pain that turned out to be severe anxiety rather than a heart attack. Still, it had been a reminder of mortality that unsettled all of us. "Will you be there?" I asked. "With Sarah and the baby, yes." My brother had married a wonderful environmental scientist, and they had recently welcomed their first child, a daughter I had only seen in photos. "What about Marcus?" "Bring him if you want," Thomas said, though we both knew that would only increase tensions. As it happened, Marcus had already committed to an assignment in Syria that would keep him away through the holidays. After much deliberation, I agreed to spend Christmas in Connecticut, alone. The decision filled me with anxiety. I scheduled extra sessions with my therapist, Dr. Landon, whom I had started seeing to process my complicated family dynamics. "What are you most afraid of?" she asked during our session the week before Christmas. "That nothing has changed," I admitted. "That we'll have the same arguments, feel the same disappointments, and I'll leave feeling like that scared little girl again instead of the accomplished professional I've become." "You're not that little girl anymore," she reminded me. "You have boundaries now. You have confidence in your choices, and you can always leave if it becomes too much." I packed carefully for the trip, including a photo album of the clinic and some of our success stories, children we had helped, families we had supported. Perhaps seeing the tangible results of my work would help my parents understand. The drive to Greenwich felt like traveling back in time. The familiar Connecticut landscapes, the exit off the highway, the winding roads through a town frozen in privileged perfection. As I approached the house, I found myself taking deep breaths, just as Dr. Landon had suggested. Mother answered the door with a careful hug close enough to appear warm to onlookers, distant enough to communicate her lingering disapproval. "Catherine," she said, stepping back to inspect me, "you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep with this clinic project on top of your regular work?" And so it began, not with outright criticism, but with concern that masked judgment. "I'm fine, Mother," I replied, stepping into the foyer that smelled of pine needles and Mother's signature holiday potpourri. The clinic is going well, actually. I brought some photos. How lovely, she said without enthusiasm. Your father's in the study. Thomas and Sarah are settling the baby down for a nap upstairs. Nothing had changed yet. Everything had. The house was exactly as I remembered, immaculate and tastefully decorated for Christmas, but I was different. I moved through these rooms not as the dutiful daughter seeking approval, but as a visitor observing a world I had once inhabited. Father greeted me with a firm handshake rather than a hug. Catherine, good to see you made it safely. Weather cooperating on the drive. Safe topics, weather, travel conditions. Nothing that might expose the rift we all pretended didn't exist. I set my gift for my niece under the tree and braced myself for what promised to be a very long holiday. Christmas Eve brought the extended family gathering, my father's parents, two of his siblings and their spouses, and an assortment of cousins I had barely kept in touch with. The annual Watson family dinner had always been a formal affair, and this year was no exception. Grandmother Watson, still elegant at 83, greeted me with more warmth than my parents had shown. Catherine, darling, tell me about this hospital work you're doing. Your father says you're quite accomplished. I was surprised that Father had mentioned my career at all, much less positively. Before I could respond, Mother steered me toward my cousin Jessica and her fiancé, a young man with a Kennedy-esque smile and perfectly coiffed hair. Catherine, you remember Jessica. She's just engaged to William Henley, Senator Henley's son. Jessica proudly displayed her enormous diamond ring. We're planning a June wedding at the Henley estate on Nantucket. You'll come, won't you? I'll try, I said, knowing that my unpredictable hospital schedule might provide a convenient excuse. Throughout the evening, conversations flowed around me like water around a stone. My relatives discussed country club memberships, recent renovations to summer homes, and the achievements of their children at prestigious schools. No one asked about my work until Uncle Robert Father's younger brother and the family rebel he had married, a divorced woman scandalous in Watson terms, approached me by the fireplace. I read about your research in that trauma case series, he said quietly. Impressive work, Catherine. Your grandfather would have been proud. I was touched by his comment. My maternal grandfather, who had died when I was in college, had been a general practitioner in a small town, the only other doctor in our family history, and someone my parents rarely mentioned. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means a lot. The evening progressed with superficial pleasantries until dinner was served in the formal dining room. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and silver place settings gleamed against the white tablecloth. Everything perfect. Everything proper. I was seated between Cousin Jessica and Aunt Margaret, positioned far from my parents at the opposite end of the table. Thomas and Sarah sat across from me, their eyes occasionally meeting mine in silent support. During the first course, I attempted to share a story about a recent patient at the clinic, a 6-year-old boy whose seemingly minor symptoms had revealed a rare but treatable condition. We caught it early enough to avoid major surgery, I explained. He'll make a full recovery. Before I could continue, Mother interrupted from her end of the table. Jessica was just telling me about the bridesmaids' dresses for the wedding. French silk imported specifically. The color is divine. The conversation obediently shifted back to wedding plans. I caught Thomas frowning slightly at Mother's deliberate redirection. Father maintained his role as patriarch, throughout dinner asking calculated questions of each family member about appropriate topics, business ventures, real estate investments, school choices for children. When he reached me, his question had a pointed edge. And Catherine, how is that charity work in the dangerous part of town going, still finding it fulfilling to give away your services? There was an undercurrent in his tone that everyone at the table recognized the suggestion that my choices were naive at best, foolish at worst. The clinic is thriving, I replied evenly. We're seeing about 60 children a week now, and we've established partnerships with several specialists who donate their time for complex cases. Father responded noncommittally. Hopefully you're taking proper security precautions. After the main course, Father stood to offer his traditional Christmas Eve toast. He raised his glass, addressing each family member in turn with specific acknowledgments. To Robert, whose legal practice continues to set records. To Margaret and Philip, whose son Thomas has been accepted early decision to Yale. He continued around the table, noting Jessica's engagement, cousin William's new position at his father's firm, and various other achievements deemed worthy of recognition. When he came to me, he paused, just long enough for everyone to notice. And to Catherine, who continues to pursue her own path. The deliberate vagueness, the subtle dismissal of my life's work as some sort of phase or rebellion rather than a meaningful contribution, it was all carefully crafted to diminish without appearing overtly cruel. As dessert was being served, Father cleared his throat, capturing the table's attention once more. His gaze fixed on me with an intensity that sent a warning through my body. While we have everyone together, Diana and I wanted to address something. His tone had shifted to what I recognized as his courtroom voice, formal, authoritative, designed to control the narrative. We've been patient with Catherine's alternative lifestyle choices. The unusual career path, the charity work in questionable neighborhoods, the association with that photographer who travels to conflict zones. My stomach tightened. This was a public trial, and I was the defendant. Mother joined in, her voice gentle in that particularly dangerous way. We've supported you financially through medical school, Catherine. We've given you every advantage, and yet you seem determined to reject everything we value: stability, reputation, appropriate social connections. I felt the eyes of every family member on me. Some curious, some uncomfortable, none intervening. Father delivered the final blow. We're ashamed of you and the choices you've made. You've thrown away every opportunity we provided for a life that's beneath your potential and our family name. The silence that followed was absolute. Forks paused midway to mouths. Breaths held. My cousin Jessica studied her plate intensely while Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For a moment I felt that familiar wave of shame and inadequacy that had dominated my childhood, the desperate need to please my parents, to earn their approval, to be the daughter they wanted. But it passed. In its place came a clarity I had never experienced in this house. I smiled. Not the placating smile of past holidays, but a genuine smile born of the sudden recognition that their opinion no longer defined me. I stood up. The scrape of my chair against hardwood punctuated the silence. I looked around the table, making brief eye contact with each person present. These were people who had known me my entire life, yet most had never really seen me. "Thank you, Father, for being so honest," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Since we're speaking truths at Christmas dinner, I'd like to share a few of my own." I smoothed my napkin and placed it beside my plate, a deliberate gesture that gave me a moment to organize my thoughts. Success is measured in different ways by different people. You measure it through wealth status and maintaining appearances. I measure it by the lives I touch and the children I help heal. I reached for my water glass, taking a small sip before continuing. My hand didn't tremble. This surprised me. Last month, I received the Callaway Prize for Innovation in Pediatric Surgery for a technique I developed that reduces recovery time for children with certain traumatic injuries by nearly 40%. The Journal of Pediatric Surgery featured my research on its cover. Father's expression flickered surprise, perhaps even a flash of pride quickly suppressed. 2 weeks ago, I treated a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who had been turned away from 3 other facilities because her family couldn't afford care. She had a complex abdominal mass that others deemed too risky to address. Today, she's cancer-free and back in school. I moved around the table slowly as I spoke, not in confrontation, but to connect with each family member as I continued. The clinic you dismiss as charity work in a questionable neighborhood has helped over 500 children in its first year. Children who would otherwise go without care or end up in emergency rooms with preventable complications. I stopped behind Thomas's chair, drawing strength from his supportive presence. As for Marcus, the photographer you so easily dismissed, his work has documented human suffering and resilience in ways that have influenced policy changes and humanitarian aid. His photos of refugee children helped secure millions in additional funding for medical relief programs. Mother's lips had formed a tight line, but she remained silent, unable to interrupt without appearing openly hostile. My relationship with Marcus is based on shared values and mutual respect. We support each other's work without resentment or conditions. That seems like a stronger foundation than social compatibility or family connections, doesn't it? I completed my circuit of the table, returning to my place but remaining standing. I'm not ashamed of the person I've become. I help people heal. I save children's lives. What I am ashamed of is that my own parents value status over substance, appearances over impact, and their reputation over my happiness. The shocked expressions around the table told me I had crossed a line never before crossed in the Watson family open, honest confrontation, rather than polite suppression of truth. To everyone's surprise, including mine, Grandmother Watson slowly applauded. 3 deliberate claps that somehow validated everything I'd said. "Well spoken, Catherine," she said, her voice quavering slightly with age but firm with conviction. "You remind me of myself at your age, though I lacked your courage to follow my heart. I wanted to be a writer, you know. Had quite a talent for it according to my professors. But in those days, Watson women married well and managed households. That was success." She turned to my father, her son. "James, you raised a daughter with conviction and purpose. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." Father's face had reddened, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Mother looked as if she might shatter into 1,000 porcelain pieces. I gathered my purse from the back of my chair. "I think it's best if I go. Thomas, Sarah, I'll see you tomorrow to meet my niece properly. For the rest of you, Merry Christmas." I walked out of the dining room with my head high, ignoring my mother's whispered "Catherine" behind me. Upstairs, I quickly packed my overnight bag, not bothering with the gifts under the tree. As I descended the stairs, Uncle Robert was waiting in the foyer. "Your grandfather kept every article about you, you know," he said quietly. "Had a scrapbook hidden in his study. Your mother found it after he died, but never mentioned it." This revelation that someone in my family had secretly celebrated my choices brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for telling me that." I managed giving him a quick hug before stepping out into the cold December night. The drive back to Boston should have felt lonely on Christmas Eve, but instead, it felt like escape, like freedom. Snow began to fall, lightly dusting the highway with white that glowed in my headlights. I turned on the radio to a station playing Christmas music and found myself singing along, something I hadn't done in years. Halfway home, I pulled over at a rest stop and called Thomas. "I'm so sorry, Katie," he said immediately. "After you left, things got pretty tense. Father tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but Grandmother kept bringing the conversation back to you and your work." "I'm sorry if I ruined Christmas," I said, realizing I had perhaps selfishly disrupted the holiday for everyone. "You didn't ruin anything," Thomas assured me. "You just finally said what needed to be said. Sarah thinks you're her new hero, by the way." I laughed at that, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Will you be okay?" he asked. "Actually, I think I will," I replied, realizing it was true. For the first time in that house, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. Back on the road, I called Marcus despite the time difference. The connection was spotty, but his voice came through. "Katie, everything okay?" "It's the middle of the night here." "Everything's fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually." I finally told my parents exactly what I think about their version of success. "About time," he laughed. "Wish I could have seen their faces." "Me too," I said, realizing I could laugh about it now. "I miss you. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Katie. I'll be home in 3 weeks. I love you." "I love you too." The call ended just as I crossed into Massachusetts. Home wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead of me in Boston, in the life I had built on my own terms. I arrived back at my apartment just after midnight, technically Christmas Day. The space felt welcoming in its familiar disorder medical journals stacked on the coffee table, Marcus's photographs on the walls, the small potted Christmas tree we had decorated before he left for Syria. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I sent text messages to friends from the hospital, several of whom were working overnight shifts. I invited them to an impromptu New Year's dinner at my apartment, my chosen family, when biological family failed. My phone rang early Christmas morning. Assuming it was Thomas checking on me, I answered without checking the caller ID. "Merry Christmas, big brother." "Catherine," my father's voice, formal as ever, but with an unfamiliar hesitation. "Did I wake you?" I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "No. Is everything all right?" "Yes. Well, that depends on your definition." He cleared his throat. "I'm calling to— that is your mother and I have been discussing last night." I waited, not offering the easy forgiveness he might have expected. "Your grandmother had quite a lot to say after you left," he continued, "about her own regrets, about how she sees herself in you." The silence stretched between us. "I don't know that I understand your choices," he finally said, "but I'm beginning to see that perhaps I don't need to understand them to respect them." Coming from my father, this was nearly revolutionary. "I'd like to see this clinic of yours," he added abruptly, "if that would be acceptable to you." I was so surprised I almost dropped the phone. "You want to visit the clinic?" "Yes, your mother and I are staying in Boston until New Year's. Thomas suggested we might reconnect before returning to Connecticut." Thomas, my persistent peacemaking brother. "The clinic is closed until after New Year's," I said, "but I could give you a tour on the 27th. "That would be suitable," Father replied, sounding more like himself. "We're at the Four Seasons. Shall we meet you there at 10? After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Was this a genuine olive branch, or another attempt to control the narrative? Either way, I had 3 days to prepare. Those days passed in a blur of shift work at the hospital and preparations at home for my New Year's gathering. I cleaned the apartment, planned a simple but elegant menu, and tried not to overthink my father's surprising call. On the morning of the 27th, I arrived at the Four Seasons 15 minutes early, nervously fidgeting with my coat buttons in the lobby. My parents appeared precisely at 10, looking out of place among the holiday tourists in their formal winter attire. Mother offered her cheek for my kiss. "Catherine, you look well rested." "That's good." Small talk filled the drive to Dorchester. Weather, Boston traffic, the historic buildings we passed. Nothing substantial, nothing real. As we pulled up to the clinic, a modest brick building with a newly painted sign reading Watson Children's Health Center. I watched their expressions carefully. "This is it," Father asked, his tone unreadable. "This is it," I confirmed, leading them inside. The clinic was empty of patients, but Rita, our nurse practitioner who lived nearby, had agreed to meet us there. She greeted my parents warmly. "Dr. Watson is a godsend," she told them without prompting. "Before this clinic opened, families around here were using the emergency room for basic pediatric care. Now they have somewhere to go that doesn't cost them a day's wages just to get in the door." I showed them around the small space, the 3 exam rooms decorated with colorful murals painted by local art students, the tiny lab where we could run basic tests, the waiting room with its well-worn children's books and toys. Father examined everything with the critical eye of someone accustomed to much grander facilities. Mother kept her handbag clutched tightly, as if someone might snatch it at any moment. "And you fund this entirely yourself?" Father asked, as we concluded the tour. "I provided the initial investment," I explained. "Now we have some grant funding and donations from several medical supply companies. We operate on a shoestring budget, but we make it work." He said in that non-committal way that could mean anything. Back in the main waiting area, Rita had set up a display of photographs children we had treated before and after their care. A little boy with a once-infected wound now smiling broadly on a playground. A teenage girl whose severe asthma had been properly controlled now holding a soccer trophy. Mother stopped before these photos, studying each one carefully. To my surprise, her eyes welled with tears. "They look so grateful," she said softly. "They are," I replied simply. Most of these families had nowhere else to turn. As we prepared to leave, a woman appeared at the door with a small boy in tow. Seeing the lights on, she had assumed we were open. "I'm so sorry," she said, recognizing her mistake. Miguel's ear infection, I think it's back. We can come back when you reopen. Miguel, about 4 years old, clutched his ear in obvious pain. It's all right, I said immediately. I can take a quick look. I glanced at my parents. This will only take a few minutes. To my surprise, they nodded. We'll wait, Father said. I took Miguel and his mother to an exam room, quickly diagnosing a recurrent ear infection and providing antibiotics from our medication closet. When we returned to the waiting area, Miguel was already looking more comfortable. His mother thanked me profusely, promising to bring homemade tamales when the clinic reopened. After they left, I turned to find my parents watching me with expressions I had rarely seen, my mother's face soft with something like wonder, my father's typically stern countenance thoughtful. You're different here, Mother said quietly. With them. This is who I've always been, I replied. You just couldn't see it. In the car heading back to their hotel, Father broke the silence. The sign. Watson Children's Health Center. You used our name. I hadn't expected him to notice or care. Yes, despite everything, I am a Watson. That means something to me, even if it's not what it means to you. Mother reached from the back seat to touch my shoulder, a rare physical gesture from her. Catherine, what you said at Christmas dinner, about being ashamed. Do you really feel that way? I considered deflecting, returning to the polite pretense that had characterized our relationship for years. But that path led nowhere new. Yes, I admitted. I spent most of my life trying to earn your approval for who I am, only to realize you only approved of who you wanted me to be. Father stared straight ahead at the road. We wanted security for you, respect, a good life. I know, I acknowledged. But we define those things very differently. At the hotel, I expected a quick goodbye, but Father surprised me again. Would you join us for lunch? There are some things we should discuss further. Over a quiet lunch in the hotel restaurant, something shifted between us. Not a complete transformation. Decades of misunderstanding couldn't dissolve in a single afternoon, but a tentative step toward mutual respect. We may never fully understand your choices, Mother said carefully. But what we saw today, the way that child looked at you, the way his mother trusted you, that means something. Father nodded. Your grandmother was right. You have conviction. Perhaps I've been measuring success by too narrow a standard. It wasn't a full apology or unconditional acceptance, but from my parents, it was revolutionary. 3 days later, they returned to Connecticut. Our goodbye was awkward, but warmer than any exchange we'd had in years. Mother actually hugged me properly, and Father held my gaze when he shook my hand. You're doing good work, Catherine, he said. Your own kind of good work. When Marcus returned from Syria in mid-January, I told him everything that had happened, the disastrous dinner, my unexpected speech, the surprising aftermath. So what happens now? He asked as we unpacked his equipment. I don't know, I admitted. We're talking again. Really talking, not just exchanging pleasantries. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but it's honest. And the next holiday? I smiled at the thought. Actually, I've invited them to come here for Easter. They're considering it. Brave woman, he teased. Terrified woman, I corrected. But I'm trying to build something new with them. Something based on who we actually are, not who we wish the other was. That Easter, my parents did visit Boston. They stayed at a hotel rather than with us, but they came to dinner at our apartment, meeting Marcus properly for the first time. The conversation was sometimes strained, sometimes surprisingly warm. Father actually laughed at one of Marcus's stories about a misadventure in Tunisia. Mother asked genuine questions about my recent surgeries. By Christmas the following year, we had established a new tradition. We gathered at Thomas's home in Seattle neutral territory with his family, Marcus, my parents, and even grandmother Watson. The old tensions hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had transformed into something manageable, something we could navigate with our newfound honesty. As we sat around Thomas's table that Christmas, Father raised his glass. To family, he said simply, in all its complicated forms. I caught his eye across the table and nodded, acknowledging how far we had come from that devastating dinner a year earlier. The journey hadn't been easy, and we still had far to go, but we had begun. Later that evening, as I helped Thomas with the dishes, he nudged me playfully. "Who would have thought that your moment of rebellion would lead to actual change?" "Not rebellion," I corrected him. "Authenticity. There's a difference." "Either way," he said, "you changed everything by refusing to be ashamed of your choices." And he was right. By standing in my truth, by rejecting the shame they tried to place on me, I had created space for a new kind of relationship, one based on who we really were rather than who we pretended to be. The journey toward authentic connection is rarely smooth. Sometimes it requires walking away before you can walk toward each other again. Sometimes it means speaking difficult truths, even when silence would be easier. But in the end, living an authentic life, one true to your own values and purpose, is the only path to genuine happiness and meaningful connection. Even when that path leads through painful confrontations and long-held family dynamics. Have you ever had to stand up for your authentic self against family expectations? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be ashamed of the person you've become.